Om Gyanam Timirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadahmayam Tadadi Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavansha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitangsha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanustute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabho Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So last week we did texts 9 and 10, and I believe this week we are starting with 11. So just for a quick review, I'll read text 9 and 10. Those who engage in the culture of nescient activities shall enter into the darkest region of ignorance. Worse still are those engaged in the culture of so-called knowledge. Number 10, the wise have explained that one result is derived from the culture of knowledge, and that a different result is obtained from the culture of nescience. So, text 9 was talking about two types of nescient activities. Anyone remember what these two types are?
Ignorance and
Ignorant.
so-called like misguiding.
Very good. Ignorance and false knowledge, right? So-called knowledge meant to misguide. So knowledge that is clothed as spiritual, but is not actually spiritual knowledge, right? And then we talked about that, how Rupa Goswami says, Utpatayeva kalpate, that such spiritual activities, when they're not done according to Shruti, Smriti, and Puranas, they're simply an unnecessary disturbance to society. And both of these are nescient, but of the two, the knowledge that is said to be spiritual, like Mayavad philosophy or Sahajya philosophies, those are worse than ignorance, because ignorance at least one can recognize, but spiritual activities that are meant to mislead people, so-called spiritual activities that are meant to mislead people, are worse. Text 10 says that there's two types of cultures. One is the culture of knowledge, and the other is the culture of nescience. The culture of knowledge liberates us, it elevates us all the way back to Krishna. But the culture of nescience degrades the soul. It pulls us down into the material existence, to the animal species of life, right? And that's why Prabhupada said that the majority of people will join Krishna consciousness, not because of its philosophy, but because of its culture. And he said this, that it's a culture of Krishna consciousness that will attract the whole world, because this is the culture of knowledge. It's not just knowledge. We are not just an academic institution where we have classes on philosophy. We have music, we have dance, we have drama, we have food, we have art, we have worship, we have song. All of this is a lifestyle, but it's a culture of knowledge. It's a lifestyle based on knowledge. And that elevates a person and that attracts the world. Families, Krishna conscious families, Krishna conscious schools. When people see our families and they see our people and they see, look, this is a different quality of persons, then they get attracted, not simply by the knowledge that we tell them. The knowledge might make perfect sense, but they have to see it in practice, and that is a culture of knowledge. And now in mantra 11, having established the importance of following the path of culture of knowledge and how that elevates us, the Isopanisad tells us something very shocking. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Mantra 11 tells us, Vidyam cha yas tadvedo bhayam saha avidyaya mrityum tirtva vidyayamrita ashnute. Only one who can learn the process of nescience and that of transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. Only one who can learn the process of nescience and that of transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. So now it's telling us that you have to cultivate these things side by side. Only one who can learn the process of nescience and that of knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death. So what does it mean here? Does it mean that we cultivate material and spiritual knowledge side by side and enjoy material and spiritual life side by side? Well, we can't mix these things. Cultivating material and spiritual knowledge is one thing. Enjoying it is another thing. But why should we pursue material knowledge if material knowledge is temporary? Prahlad Maharaj did not pursue material knowledge. So Prabhupada explains more. The previous two mantras have explained that ignorance and false knowledge bind one and are in contrast to true knowledge. Mantra 11 describes how one must know the relative positions of material and spiritual knowledge to transcend the material energy and attain deathlessness. Mantra 11 assures us that if we can cultivate our material knowledge alongside spiritual knowledge, we can transcend this temporary world and attain our eternal position. Material science and knowledge alone can never free us from birth, death, disease, and old age. We must revive our eternal relationship with the Supreme Lord. Actually, the soul always exists eternally, but our material attachments bind us to this temporary world of repeated birth and death. In modern society, we seek only that knowledge which will increase our material desires and sense gratification, and thus only deliver us into the cruel hands of death. As we learn to live in this material world, we must also seek knowledge of the soul and our eternal relationship with the Supreme Soul. The goal of all knowledge is to engage even our material knowledge in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead by hearing about, glorifying, remembering, and worshiping. So, knowing both, material knowledge is insufficient. Hiranyakashipu tried to conquer death through material knowledge, but he tried and failed. To achieve our real means of enjoyment, we should engage in spiritual knowledge. This is the second time in Sri Isopanisad that Prabhupada says that real sense gratification is available in a spiritual body. So the Isopanishad is saying that we need to cultivate both side by side, not to encourage us to cultivate our material knowledge, but rather to tell us that the material knowledge naturally is there. We have material knowledge, but it is insufficient to attain the Lord. That along with the material knowledge that we learn as we grow up in school and all these things, we must also pursue spiritual knowledge. That's the first point. And the second point is we cultivate material knowledge in the sense of understanding the nature of this material world, right? So to transcend this material world, we must understand the spiritual reality. We must understand how wonderful Krishna is. We must understand the spiritual world, right? But at the same time, we must understand the flaws, the shortcomings of the material world, right? If we don't understand that, then our determination, our conviction in spiritual life will not sustain. Because at least at this point, we don't have experience of the spiritual world, right? At this point, we are unable to sustain our spiritual life simply on descriptions of the spiritual world or the spiritual experiences in terms of the spiritual inspiration from the practice of Krishna consciousness. We also need to recognize the nature of the material world and understand its emptiness, its shortcomings in order to pursue spiritual life. For example, uh, uh, because of the nature of the world, that it's temporary and full of suffering. And this is something that we can observe. Because of the, as Prabhupada said, as sure as death, because of the existence of death, all the great theologians and philosophers of the world, after observing this fact, they pursued their spiritual journey. If you look back at the lives of any tradition and their great teachers and philosophers, you'll see one thing that is common. And this is something that academics, scholars have noted, and one can observe oneself, that all of them, though their solution may be different, they all saw the same problem. They all became who they became because they first observed the temporary nature of this world. And based on that, then they began searching, okay, then what is permanent? For example, in the Buddhist tradition, you have Buddha. And Buddha is the son of a king. He's a prince leading a luxurious life. And one day he leaves the kingdom. And there, what does he see? It's described that he sees a sick man. He sees an old man. And he sees a dead man. And when he has these three sights, he thinks, what's the point of life? What's the point of material life? What's the point of enjoying this world if all of us need to go through this? So he has an attendant that goes with him, and he asks him, the minister, do we all go through this? Do we all become old? He says, everyone gets old. Do we all get sick? He said, yes, everyone gets sick. And do we all die? And he says, yes, we all die. And then the Buddha says, ah, Then what is the solution? So they keep walking. And then the fourth sight that Buddha sees is of the monk, of the sannyasi. He has given up the world and he is sitting there very peacefully, very happy. So these are known as the four passing sights. And then this is what inspires Buddha to leave his perfect life as a prince, materially so-called perfect life, and take the life of a mendicant. How could he give up such a luxurious life? So many mendicants were coming to the kingdom. He had probably seen so many those spiritual persons, but he took to spiritual life because of recognizing, having knowledge of the nature of the material world also. Another example is Immanuel Kant. Right? Immanuel Kant, he was a philosopher in the Western. He is a philosopher, a very famous one, and is described that as a young man, he was just leading a normal life. And one day, as he was walking down his street where he grew up, he started to look around, and there was like a revelation that he had at that point, that he looked around and he noticed that everything is changing. He noticed everything about himself has changed. The trees have changed. The wind has changed. Life has changed. His thoughts has changed. So then he began to ponder that if everything in this world is change, then what is that which is permanent behind the change? And in seeking that, that's how he became a philosopher. And then he comes up with his theory of phenomena and noumena, that this whole world is a world of phenomena, and behind the phenomena is the noumena. So though religion requires faith, the basis of faith is something that we can observe, which is time, temporality. The inspiration, you could say the catalyst behind faith, is something that we can observe. So we won't have that faith. The problem is we won't have the spiritual faith, which is something we don't observe, if we don't have knowledge of what we observe. Because what we observe, we cannot deny. The reality, the temporary reality of life is something we cannot deny. And that is what inspires us to go on a spiritual journey to begin with. Then once we have the spiritual experience, then the spiritual experience as we advance alone sustains our spiritual life. But both must be there. How to achieve spiritual knowledge? Spiritual life is achieved through following the 18 principles of Mantra 10 and engaging in the Sankirtan movement. So last time we painstakingly went through the 18 principles. You all may remember those, maybe. You can memorize them. 18 principles are so nice. Prabhupada has given that. And engaging in the Sankirtan movement. Does anyone want to mention one or two of the 18 principles? I remember one of them, to try to aspire to live in a secluded place, not in material association. Yes, go ahead, Vijay Nishingaprabhu.
Non-violence.
Non-violence, very nice.
Giving proper respect.
Giving proper respect to all living beings, yes.
Don't use religion for name and fame.
Don't use religion for name and fame. Wow, very nice.
One should not accept more than what they require.
One should not accept more than what they require. So
Forbearance.
Forbearance, yes. So by practicing these principles, grounding our life in these principles, and then engaging in the Sankirtan movement, or simultaneously engaging in the Sankirtan movement, we advance spiritually. Knowledge of matter must be there. We should use economic development, sense gratification, and religion to help us develop devotional service to Krishna. Dharma, Artha, Kam, and Moksha, right? These are the four goals of material life. And we must understand the nature of this world, how it entangles us. And in understanding the nature of this world, we can then properly engage this world in Krishna's service. Here, the message is not that we should become experts in these things, that we should become experts in Kama, so therefore read the Kama Sutra. We should become experts in Dharma, so read the Dharma Shastras, all these Shastras. No. But the point is that whatever economic development, sense gratification we have, we can engage it in Krishna service and use it as an asset. So, like these 6 opulences that one has, that Krishna has in full, that we have a beauty, strength, fame, wealth. These are ordinarily considered to be weaknesses or drawbacks in spiritual life. These are temptations or things that are avoided in spiritual life. They become weaknesses. However, if they're engaged in Krishna service, they can, if properly engaged in Krishna service, they can become strengths. Because if you have wealth and you engage in Krishna service, you can do such great service. Right? Ambarish Prabhu, his fortune is that he has wealth. He can build the whole Mayapur project and receive the mercy of all the acharyas and the devotees, and everyone is praying for Ambarish Prabhu when he got sick. Other devotees are doing just as much austerity. But because he had the good fortune of being so wealthy, he could do that. But at the same time, we should be careful with Yukta Vairagya, engaging material things in Krishna service, because we can also become very attached to those material things. So Amrish Prabhu is engaging his wealth in Krishna service. At the same time, he was once saying that how it was so difficult to be Krishna conscious and be so wealthy, because the wealth talks to you, it pulls you in so many directions. So the devotee actually prefers, better I don't have wealth, because is more of a possibility I may become distracted. But if one has it, then one must know how to use it. Another example of material knowledge that is helpful in spiritual life is Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2 and Canto 3. So in Canto 3, the process of Sankhya is described, and all the different layers of material life are described, right? The different elements and how they cover this material world. And it's described that the reason why the Bhagavatam is describing this, or the yogis are understanding this, is that once they understand the nature of the material world, they can one by one identify that they're not these things. And like we peel the skin of an onion off, they peel one by one these different elements off of them, so that what is left is who they actually are, the soul. So by recognizing the elements and how we are not these elements, both physical and subtle, the material mind, the intelligence, the ego, we're not these things, but we're actually spirit souls with a spiritual mind and spiritual intelligence and spiritual ego, then we can not misidentify ourselves. What kind of mundane knowledge is okay? How to keep the body and mind fit and healthy for spiritual life. This type of mundane knowledge is okay. Prabhupada was so good at health items for the service of Krishna, because he was engaging that knowledge. That knowledge could be directly engaged in Krishna's service. This body is actually our most useful tool in Krishna's service, because it's only due to the body that we can actually serve Krishna in this material world right now. I was just listening to a tape where Prabhupada was saying that there's no material situation that can impede us in Krishna's service, from Krishna's service. And he says, even if you become very sick, even if you become very old, even if your body doesn't work at all, nothing can stop you from engaging in Krishna's service. So both are true, that the body helps us in spiritual life, yet at the same time, as we advance in spiritual life, nothing stops us. The body and the ailments of the body cannot stop us from advancing in spiritual life. The real nature of material entanglement, the study of Prakriti from the transcendental point of view, right? This is what I was just talking about. The second kind of mundane knowledge that is helpful, here it's very nicely being stated, is the understanding the nature of this material world. So two types of knowledge must be known. The first one, if we generalize it, is the knowledge of how we can engage material things or material knowledge in the service of Krishna. And the second type of knowledge, mundane knowledge, is how is this material world constituted so that I can become free of it. I can break out of it. So how can I break out of it? By understanding it, by understanding how can I break out of it. And secondly, one of the ways of breaking out of it is knowing how to engage it in Krishna's service. So here is the summary. One falls down through being involved in nescience. People involved in ordinary, mundane activities will go to the darkest region of ignorance. And the materialistic intellectuals will go to an even worse place. In order to become transcendental, you don't just forget about mundane things, but you learn to understand them from the transcendental point of platform. In this way, you get the proper picture and you become free from Maya. So this is a section of the Isopanisad, 9 through 11. It's one kind of unit. And there's such a nice balance in this unit because Krishna begins this unit, this 3 verses, by saying that don't be involved in mundane knowledge and activities. If you do, you go to the darkest region of ignorance. Right? This is text 9 and 10. This is ignorance, he says in 9. And then he says, if you are involved in this ignorance, you go to the darkest region of ignorance. But then the natural question that comes up in a person's mind is then, what do I do with the world? Right? Krishna, you're telling us, don't be involved in this material knowledge and activities. Don't go into material intellectualism. Don't become a very materially educated person, this, that. But then what do I do with this world? Then the 11th verse is saying, no, you don't just become transcendental by forgetting about mundane things, by saying neti neti, it doesn't exist, but rather understand it in the proper perspective, engage it in Krishna's service. Without knowledge of spiritual life, our material plans lead us to strife. So this section is now over. I want to show you one short clip from Srila Prabhupada that very nicely illustrates the material knowledge that we must have. And we've heard this thousands of times, but this is just a very rare footage that one devotee gave to me. And it's amazing. And maybe some of you have already seen it. It's like a few minutes, just a clip from Srila Prabhupada, where he's telling us to see the material world as it is, to analyze the nature of this world. And this is the true material knowledge, right? That's being told here, the side-by-side material knowledge that we need in addition to the spiritual knowledge. So I'm just going to share that really quickly. Because I really like it. It's very powerful. Sorry, one second. I'm just trying to okay, fine. Okay, there we go.
Why are they acting disease? Why are they acting old age? These are the problems. Ah.
It's just 30 seconds.
Happening. Why are they acting birth? Why are they acting death? Why are they acting disease? Why are they acting old age? These are the problems. Ah. These are the problems, and these problems can be solved in human form of life, not in the life of cats and dogs. Take it. So, our only request is that you make your life successful, come to the real understanding of your existence, and this is possible simply by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
I'll play this once more.
I'm suffering. Why are they acting birth? Why are they acting death? Why are they acting disease? Why are they acting old age? These are the problems. Ah. These are the problems, and these problems can be solved in human form of life, not in the life of cats and dogs. Take it. So, our only request is that you make your life successful, come to the real understanding of your existence, and this is possible simply by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
So here, isn't it so nice? So here we see how Prabhupada is doing both things so nicely. He first presents the material knowledge, right? If both things are there. It's a material knowledge. Okay, what is our real problem? Yes, Mataji, so powerful, isn't it? What is our real problem? Birth, disease, old age, and death. We can observe this. This is our problem. And then he says, these can be stopped by chanting Hare Krishna. Then he gives the spiritual knowledge, the spiritual solution. And it's so characteristic of Srila Prabhupada's preaching. You know, Prabhupada's lectures, they are not so flowery or sentimental, you see, but it's exactly the same thing, what Isopanisad, most of his lectures. What is the reality of the material world? What is the spiritual solution? He always has these two elements in his lectures and classes. Okay, so this was a short verse. Let's at least start the next one, and then we can have more discussion. Well, let's go to text 12. Last time also we did 2 verses, so I think this is a good. Okay, mantras 12 to 14. We're making progress. Now that we have received guidelines for acquiring knowledge, the Sri Isopanisad goes on to provide guidelines for our spiritual practices in mantras 12 to 14. So how do we get knowledge? It all begins with knowledge, and now the practices. How do we practice? Mantras 12 to 14 in brief. Mantra 12 describes how worshippers of Asambhuti go to the darkest region of ignorance. But those who worship the impersonal absolute truth, Sambhuti, go to a worse place. Mantra 13 details the varying results for worshippers of relative truth. This material world, Asambhuti, compared to worshippers of the absolute truth, Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sambhuti. And Mantra 14 says that we should know both side by side in order to enter the spiritual kingdom. So very complex, right? But it's actually very simple. And this is why we can actually understand this only through the eyes of a pure devotee. Because the Lord speaks, especially in the Upanishads and in the Vedas. It said that the Lord speaks in very confidential ways, in very enigmatic ways, difficult to understand ways. So one can easily misunderstand this, that, well, worshippers of ignorance go to darkness, but worshippers of the truth go to even a worse darkness. How is that possible? Because the worshippers of the truth, the absolute truth in text 12 is referring to the impersonalists. Mantra 12 explains that materialistic religion is detrimental and transcendental religion without bhakti is more dangerous. Mantra 13 defines the difference between the relative and the absolute. And Mantra 14 directs us to understand both relative and absolute to attain perfection. Right? So it's like the mirror of the previous three verses, but now applied to practices rather than knowledge. We have to understand both the relative and the absolute to attain perfection. Basically the same thing, but said in a different way. So we'll start with mantra 12. Andham tamaha pravishanti ye sambhutim upasate tato bhuya ivate tamo yau sambhutyam rata. Those who are engaged in the worship of demigods enter into the darkest region of ignorance, and still more, so do the worshippers of the impersonal absolute. So, as I mentioned, it's like a copy. So now mantra 12, we are comparing with mantra 9. Mantra 9 says, those engaged in the culture of Neshan activities shall enter into the darkest region of ignorance. Worse still are those engaged in the culture of so-called knowledge. Here it's saying those who are engaged in the worship of demigods enter into the darkest regions of ignorance. Still more so do the worshippers of the impersonal absolute. This is why Prabhupada always was battling Mayavad philosophy more than even materialistic philosophies, because he could recognize, based on the authority of the Shastras, that this is worse. Mantra 12 is saying worshippers of demigods and impersonal absolute enter into darkness. This same verse is translated in different ways by different acharyas. Madhvacharya translates this verse as follows: those who worship the Lord as only the destroyer of misery and ignorance, not accepting the Lord as the creator of good qualities, enter into deep darkness. Those who worship the Lord as only the creator of bliss and knowledge, not accepting the Lord as destroyer of bad qualities, enter even deeper in darkness. Now you may say, how is it that Madhvacharya has such a different translation from Srila Prabhupada? Because the Upanishads and like Vedanta Sutra, which is the Veda Anta, the end of the Upanishads, they are written in the sutra form. Very, very condensed. So their explanation, their understanding is given to us by the Acharyas. And the way sutra forms are written is that they can be understood in different ways. It's not that one way is better than the other. It's not that there's something wrong in different explanations, but rather they're written in a way that they can be understood in different ways. Here's a meaning, here's a deeper meaning, here's another meaning. And why is that? Because this is the nature of Shastra, that based upon our realization, we understand it. We understand it to a certain depth. This is why Krishna calls the knowledge of the Lord the most confidential knowledge. Even though it's clearly accessible, there's millions of books available, millions of printed copies of the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Gita. Why is it confidential? Because even though it's written there, we will understand it based upon the depth of our understanding. So the Acharyas, they have the deepest understanding, and they are explaining it to us, that this is what this verse means. So all of these are simultaneously true. What Prabhupada is saying is true. What Madhvacharya is saying is also telling us, watch out for this. Don't just think that Krishna is the creator of bliss and knowledge. He is also the destroyer of our misery and of bad qualities. Similarly, Vedanta Deshika, who is in the Ramanuja Sampradaya, disciple of Ramanujacharya, he has translated this verse as follows: those pursuing liberation, who engage solely in meditating on destroying the unfavorable elements to attainment of the Lord, enter into deep ignorance. But those who engage solely in meditation for attaining the Lord enter into even deeper ignorance. This is a very deep translation, right? This is a very difficult translation. This is, we can discuss these, but we have limited time. But here in this one, it said that if we simply are meditating to attain the Lord, but not to serve him, not to engage in devotional service, that leads us into deep ignorance. And if we are worshiping the Lord just to destroy the unfavorable elements, so, we're worshiping the Lord so that this misery can go away, this misery can go away, that is ignorance, right? Because we're not worshiping the Lord purely. But even a deeper ignorance is when we are engaging in the worship of the Lord for our own attainment rather than our own perfection, liberation, so we can be happy rather than wanting to serve him. Actually, Ramanujacharya taught us unalloyed devotional service. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the Goswamis, they drew more from the writings of Ramanujacharya and his followers than they did from Madhvacharya and his followers. Madhvacharya also, in fact, we align ourselves with Madhvacharya, Brahma Madhva Gauriya Sampradaya. But as far as discussing bhakti, Ramanujacharya, the followers of Ramanujacharya, they discussed the details of the practice of unalloyed bhakti even more than Madhvacharya did. Madhvacharya's tradition is focused also a lot on ritual. So bhakti to Krishna, but also ritual. But Ramanujacharya, Vedanta Tisha, they talked about prapatti more, surrender, right? So this is like the first part of this is like the four people who approach the Lord for Chaturvidha Bhajante Mam, for wealth, freedom from distress, all these things. So they want to destroy the unfavorable elements to attain the Lord. That's okay, but you're not worshiping the Lord for pure love, for pure devotion. So it's not so good. It takes us to ignorance. But then sometimes we worship the Lord because we want to attain the Lord. This can mean also Mayavad philosophy, right? First one is we want something material. The second one is we want Mayavad, we want to attain the Lord, meaning become one with the Lord. And that's an even deeper ignorance. And you can see that how Prabhupada's translation is resonating with Vedanta Deshika's translation, because he's clarifying to us even more what Vedanta Deshika is saying here. Well, what does attaining the Lord mean? It means that the focus is on me. I want to become either God, which is very deep ignorance, or I want to become like God rather than serve God. Right? And the translation of Baladevi Vidyabhushan is those who worship the unmanifest Prakriti attain the ignorance of the material realm, and those who worship the manifest Brahman attain even deeper ignorance. So we see that Prabhupada's translation exactly follows Baladev Vidyabhushan's translation. So if those who are worshipping the Brahman effulgence or just Brahman separate from Krishna, not for love for Krishna, those go even in deeper ignorance. Now in our own Gaudiya tradition, well, Baladev Vidyabhushan is also part of that, but in our more recent past, translations by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktivinoda Thakur translates this verse as, those who worship the impersonal feature of God, asambhuti, enter darkness, and those who are absorbed in matter, sambhuti, enter greater darkness. This one now is very interesting, because here Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who's just 2 generations before Srila Prabhupada, seems to be translating it in the opposite way. Those who are worshipping impersonal feature enter darkness, but those who are absorbed in matter, they're after material life, enter even greater darkness. It seems to be opposite, but let's see more. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur's commentary. When an object loses its qualities, it becomes asambhuti. Asambhuti occurs by destruction or merging. Those who cultivate the impersonal aspect of the Lord without qualities, nirvishesha, are worshippers of the asambhuti, and they enter darkness. When the jiva's consciousness of his existence disappears, nothing can be understood. In that state, there is no light at all. Thus, it is called darkness. Those who are engaged in sambhuti or material existence are even further from realizing Atma, soul and God, and enter worse darkness. So Prabhupada in one place says how the impersonalists are at least transcendentalists, but those engaged in matter are not even transcendentalists. They're not even on the transcendental level. And here Bhaktivinoda Thakur is resonating that idea that way. However, before we go to this one, however, it still seems opposite to what Prabhupada is saying, how he's translating it here. But it's not opposite. Maybe what is the difference? Or you could say, how can we understand Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Prabhupada's differing translations. Anyone want to suggest? So this is Bhaktivinoda Thakur's, and you can pull up Prabhupada's on your phone or in the book. No one has a suggestion? Prabhupada is talking about what when he talks about matter?
Material world. Material world.
Yes, it's the material world, that's true. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying also material world, and he's saying those are going in even deeper darkness. So yes, Om, that's a good point, but it seems to be the same. Prabhupada is talking about specifically the worshippers of the demigods. He's not saying just that those people are absorbed in matter. So someone who is like drunk in a bar, they're not worshiping the demigods. They're just in deep ignorance. They're drinking, smoking, all these. But those who are worshiping the impersonal Brahman, the absolute truth, they are higher, right? But those who are worshiping the demigods, they are worshiping the Lord in the Gita, it said, but in the wrong way. They're not just absorbed in matter. So they are better than those who are the impersonalists. The very subtle difference here. From mantra 12, we learn that those who worship demigods or impersonal absolute are covered by ignorance. The personal form of the absolute truth, Bhagavan, the Supreme Lord himself, is fully independent and is a source of both the demigods and the impersonal spiritual effulgence. Knowing him to be the highest realization of the absolute truth, devotees render loving service unto him. People worship the demigods for some material sense gratification or heavenly pleasures, but such happiness is only temporary and binds the soul to the cycle of birth and death. Worshippers of the impersonal aspect of the Lord as the absolute truth are also practicing another form of atheism, as they deny the supreme personality of Godhead. These pseudo-religionists fall into the darkest regions of ignorance as they mislead their followers from eternal spiritual life. Okay, so let me see how many more slides we have on this. Okay, we're almost done. So we'll just finish this very quickly. Materialism versus pseudo-religion. Materialism is bad. Pseudo-religion is worse. A wolf is dangerous, and a wolf dressed like a sheep is even more dangerous. Same point as text 9, right? 12 and 9. It said knowledge is bad, material knowledge is bad, but spiritual knowledge dressed as material knowledge, material knowledge dressed as spiritual knowledge is even worse. So the same thing here. Religion, materialism is bad, but materialism dressed as religion is even worse. Contrast between demigod worship or impersonalism and Krishna bhakti. So now we're going back to Prabhupada's translation, or we already have, and now we're analyzing this. So surrender versus speculation. To fully understand Krishna, one has to surrender. Otherwise, through negation, one will have an incomplete idea of the absolute truth. There's also a difference between the temporary versus permanent. Demigod worship and impersonal realization give limited and temporary benefits. So, why is demigod worship or impersonalism considered temporary, not considered bad, and Krishna bhakti considered good and permanent? because impersonalism and impersonal liberation is also temporary. Because once they get liberation, Prabhupada says, patanti adha, they fall down again. Those who receive benedictions from demigods go to the heavens, but they fall down again. So the first one was surrender versus speculation. There's so much speculation in impersonalism and demigod worship. Surrender to Krishna is better. The second is the difference between temporary and permanence. And the third one is material versus spiritual. The planets of the demigods are all within the material world and therefore subject to the miseries and problems of material existence, unlike Krishna's abode. So demigod worship is material, its results are also material, but Krishna's abode is spiritual and eternal. Impersonal liberation is kind of in the middle. It's spiritual, but not eternal. And cheating versus truth. Impersonalists who claim to be avatars and concoct philosophy create a society of cheaters and cheated. However, governments are no longer strong enough to stop this. Prabhupada makes this point, that how it is a duty of the leaders to stop these false teachers and philosophies. Just like thieves prosper when there isn't strong government, similarly, when there isn't strong spiritual leadership, then the apasampradayas, or the false philosophies, the impersonalists and the sahajas, they prosper because these false philosophies, they're like thieves. They want to they steal away a person's spiritual life for their own benefit. And real knowledge and detachment, these can only arise from devotional service to Lord Krishna. Impersonalists try to make a show of devotional service through philanthropic work, etc. But they don't actually come up to the standard. They disobey so many important injunctions, like surrendering to a bona fide spiritual master. They sometimes claim to be the ex-disciples of some other bogus person. And that's the end. Okay, so we'll stop here. If there's any comments, questions, reflections, we can take that now. Vijay Singha Prabhu, yes, please.
Thank you, Prabhu, for this class. Although I'm really struggling with this class today, I have a couple of questions. First one is actually going back to the previous verse. You know, the slide that you showed with the moksha, dharma, karma, artha. If you could bring that slide back up.
Okay. Bring that, yes. Yes.
Which talks about knowing both.
I'll do this here. Okay. Oops. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that one. So I understand that, you know, knowing about sense gratification can help you avoid it. But can you specifically comment on how to use sense gratification in devotional service?
Yes, that's the part here that we were saying that how there's two parts, and I could have made this more clear in the slides. It was a little bit convoluted because it takes time to actually figure out how to, how to structure things. That there's two aspects to it. One is knowing, like you were saying, which is recognizing the nature of the world. And the second part is using it. So once we understand it, then Yukta Vairagya is a principle of using our material education in Krishna's service.
But how do you use sense gratification in Krishna's service?
In the sense, we're supposed to give up material sense gratification, right? But we're using it in the sense that that whatever gratification we have, like our wealth, our home, we're engaging in Krishna's service. So we are using this, because we're not pure devotees. So let's say I'm going on a vacation, right? So that is my sense gratification. I could just be like Haridas Thakur chanting in my room, but I have desire to go on vacation. But then I utilize that by going and visiting temples of the Lord.
Got it. Okay.
So that's not pure bhakti. You're absolutely right that we really, the goal is to transcend it. That's not pure bhakti, but Isopanisad is saying, it's talking about the path here, right? Isopanisad is saying, how do we attain liberation, or how do we attain nescience? How do we attain perfection? We do it by engaging both in Krishna's service.
Okay, got it. That makes more sense. I have another question. Can I ask, or should I wait until the end?
No, go ahead. Yes.
So the next question, this is about 12. That's where I'm really having difficulty grasping the concept. I think I got it eventually, but I was having difficulty understanding how praying to demigods or being impersonous, is one is worse, the other one is even worse. How that can be worse than somebody who is only into sense gratification and is a complete materialist and does not believe in God at all. So I was having issue understanding that, but I think I understand the reason is because if you go the impersonalist route, it's a permanent route in the wrong direction and there's no way back. Whereas somebody who's still a materialist and is involved in sense gratification, he still has hope of turning it around and coming towards bhakti at some point, maybe. So maybe that's why does that mean that's why it's worse being an
Yes,
impersonalist than a materialist?
Yes, that's why it's worse to be an impersonalist than a worshiper of the demigods. But like you are saying, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is agreeing with you that, like you are saying, the person who's just in material life, like the drunkard, the person who's, the criminal, who's a murderer, they are worse than those engaged in the impersonal feature. See, Bhaktivinoda's translation: those who worship the impersonal feature of God enter darkness, and those who are absorbed in matter enter greater darkness. And that's where I was making that distinction, that here Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur seem to be talking about slightly different things. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is talking about the gross materialist. So gross materialist is the worst. Then the impersonalist is better. He's translating this verse in that way. And then Prabhupada is saying impersonalist is, so gross materialist, impersonalist, but he's not talking about the gross materialist. And then above them are the worshippers of the demigods. He's saying the worshippers of the demigods go to ignorance, but worse are the impersonalists. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying impersonalists are worse, are not good darkness, but worse are the gross materialists. And Prabhupada also in other places, he says this, that the impersonalists are at least transcendentalists, whereas those people absorbed in complete nescience are worse. Now, to your second point, that if you become a Mayavadi, you really get stuck there for eternity. So the materialist in some ways is better. True and not true. Impersonal liberation is not eternal, right? We fall back down. But true, completely true, your point that impersonal liberation is a long detour. I mean, who knows how long we'll be stuck up there in Jyoti before some Sankirtan party comes traveling through, and we might get out of it, or we might finally get bored and come here. And so that's why, yeah.
But I thought liberation of any type or mukti is permanent. So even if it's the wrong type, if it's impersonal liberation, that's permanent. That once you've been liberated, whatever way you were liberated or whichever path you've chosen, that's permanent,
Mm.
even though it's impersonal.
Out of the
And they
5
don't
types
fall
of
down.
liberation, out of the 5 types of liberation, 4 are permanent. But Sayujya Mukti is, Prabhupada explains, kind of, you could say, this is, as they say, this is off the record. He explains off the record that actually this liberation is not permanent because the soul by nature needs pleasure. But it may be so long that it's like permanent, but eventually, and then he quotes Bhagavatam, which says that those who attain this position, patanti adha, they fall down again into this material world because they can't stand it after a while. It's just so boring there for the soul, but the soul wants pleasure. So it is not permanent. It ends, and but that's why our Goswamis say that it's like fearful to get impersonal liberation. They're afraid of it because what will happen? We won't get the service of Krishna. He said it's better. And these are the exact words by Prabodhananda Saraswati Thakur. It is better to be a jackal. Jackal is considered a low animal. To be born as a jackal or a dog or something, than to attain impersonal liberation. Because at least as a jackal, I might get the association of a devotee. But as a personal liberation, who knows when I will get that association and break free of it? So yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. What verse can I find that impersonal liberation ultimately they do fall down? Where will I
Yes.
find that?
So the Sanskrit words are patanti adha. I forget the whole verse, but Prabhupada said this in many lectures. So I'll look it up. You can also try if you can find, but if I forget, send me a text. I will find
Sure.
that verse.
Sure.
Many times Prabhupada says this. Yes.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Sorry for taking so much time.
Thank you. Nice comments. Nice points. Okay. So maybe we'll just take one more and then we'll have the summary because I need to leave a little early today. Um, so maybe I'll ask Sonal to go because they haven't.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Hare Krishna.
I had a question because I remember one time Prabhupada said how Jesus Christ was a devotee of Krishna, and it was said somewhere in Isopanisad Sloka 7.
Jesus Christ is the devotee of Krishna, you said?
Yeah, I think Prabhupada said that in one of his lectures.
Oh, Prabhupada has said many times that Jesus Christ is a pure devotee, and he says he is our God brother. Prabhupada says he is our God brother, which means that he is worshiping the same person that Krishna is that Prabhupada is worshiping. If he's his God brother, he has to be the same person. So both of them were worshiping Krishna. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Nice question. Badr Krishna Prabhu, if it's quick, we can take your comment or question. Or if it's longer, then we'll.
Sorry, thank you, Prabhu, for the wonderful class. So my question is, as you were explaining, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we should have knowledge of both spiritual knowledge and science. And the reason is that once we know what science does for us, and it is temporary, and simultaneously, if we have spiritual knowledge, then we can apply the knowledge of science to get out of it and engage ourselves in devotional service so that we get liberated. Is that the correct understanding, Prabhu?
Yes, except for the last part, not so that we can get liberated. We get liberated by Krishna's mercy,
Right.
but yes, exactly like you're saying, we need to have the knowledge of why the material world is not good to encourage us in our spiritual life, right? To act as a catalyst. Because just like Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, and this is the metaphor, he says that the moon is very beautiful, but the moon set on the dark night becomes even more beautiful, right? Otherwise, you don't see the moon in the day. So when we understand the darkness of the material world, not not become absorbed in it. But when we understand the darkness of the material world, then we appreciate spiritual life and the need for it. Yes.
And also, when we have spiritual knowledge, and if that knowledge is applied in Krishna service, then we don't get all the wrong, all the negative karmas that we would otherwise if it is not applied in Krishna service.
Yes, yes.
Thank
Nice.
you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much. Haripriya, you can do your, please summarize.
Yes, sure. So for text 11, we see how Panta 11 assures us that if we can cultivate our material knowledge alongside spiritual knowledge, we can transcend this temporary world and attain our eternal position. And material knowledge is insufficient. Real sense gratification is available in the spiritual world. An example is in Hiranyakashipu, who tried to control death. And the story of Buddha also explains us that that until we do not see suffering, we cannot take to Krishna consciousness. So we should experience both, and then we will realize that happiness of Krishna consciousness. And then we see that how we should use dharma, artha, kama, moksha in the service of the Lord, yukta vairagya. But at the same time, we should be very careful of falling down. Nothing can stop us. If we are determined in Krishna consciousness, nothing can stop us from advancing in spiritual life. And knowledge, how can I break, like 2 points, how can I break out of it, and how to engage in Krishna's service, everything. Engage everything in Krishna's service. And then mantra 12, it describes how worshippers of Asambhuti go to the darkest region of ignorance, but those who worship the impersonal absolute truth go to an even worse place. And this verse was kind of like text 9. And material versus zero religion, like it was also mentioned in text 9 also, that materialism is bad, but zero religion is even worse, since a wolf is better than a wolf just as a sheep. Thank you, Prabhu Harish.
Thank you. Such a nice summary. Short and very sweet. Thank you. Om, you also had your hand up since the summary was very nice and succinct. We have a few minutes.
Hare Krishna, Bridget Pram, Jishwapa, Jayadev. Very nice lecture. Very technical lecture. My question was on the Bhaktivinoda Thakur with the Srila Prabhupada. So, if my understanding is correct, is it that Srila Prabhupada is talking about, he's trying to, tell us that he's giving a disclaimer that impersonalism goes to darkest region. So he's saying impersonalism, and then on top of it is the people who are in science activities, who are like in the ignorance, and then on top of it is demigod worshippers. And then Sharbatinor Thakur is saying that
No. So I'll just correct you there. Both Prabhupada and Bhaktivinoda Thakur are saying that at the very bottom are those who are absorbed in nescience. Above them are those who are the impersonalists, and above them are the demigod worshippers.
Okay.
Because Bhaktivinoda Thakur doesn't talk about demigod worshippers, and Prabhupada doesn't talk about the nescience. But both of them talk about impersonalism. So if we look at it carefully, this is what we come to: demigod worship, then impersonalists, then those in nescience. But all of them are nescience, but just as far as the intensity or degree of nescience, that's what it seems to be saying.
Okay, thank you. Hare Krishna.
And also one final point on this point, that our acharyas may sometimes say different things. And when they say different things, or sometimes even contradicting things, in this case, we resolve the contradiction. But even if we're not able to, we need to understand the mood that they're saying it with. That Sometimes they have a certain mood or context in which they're saying. So both are always correct, but they're correct in different ways, and they're correct in different contexts. So here they're emphasizing or analyzing things in different ways, and this is how they're explaining it.
Okay, thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Thank you, everyone. We'll meet next week as normal. See you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Babu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Dandavat
Krishna.
Pranam.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranam.
Sitaram Bhavani.